We want to get to NBC's Julie Tsirkin. She's traveling this weekend with the President of the United States. That takes her to West Palm Beach. The President delivering those remarks, as we saw in the early morning hours, from his Mar-a-Lago property there. Julie, when we spoke earlier, you made a point that I thought was interesting. You know that the President was wearing the same outfit with that white USA cap, the same tie, lack of tie, the same shirt and blazer that we saw him in yesterday when he is traveling on the road, which appears to indicate that his statement in the early morning hours was recorded late yesterday, which gives us some indication that the President's mind was made up well before these strikes began in order for these remarks to be prepared for his delivery. What more do we know from the White House's perspective as it relates to them notifying members of Congress as well?
Yeah, that's right, Peter. And I'll start off with what we're hearing from the President. We know that he was awake in the early morning hours. We saw him not only this statement that was posted to his Truth Social, but reposting, retruthing various posts as it relates to these strikes, this operation in Iran, and otherwise some domestic matters even the President posting about. But we also are waiting at this hour to see if President Trump plans to talk to reporters again this morning. I say that because just a couple of weeks ago I was here when the President announced the operation that we saw unfold in Venezuela. They then called a news conference, sort of impromptu. The President was flanked by his top officials, his envoy Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner was there, Secretary of State Marco Rubio as well. We don't know the kind of people and aides the President has with him right now, but I should say this is the sixth military operation that the President had observed and had launched from his Mar-a-Lago home, from his winter estate, as he likes to call it here. We know the President has been spending most of his weekends here, but in that video that he posted that you're hearing on screen there, unclear again where that was filmed, but notable in what he was wearing. I thought a couple of moments jumped out as we've been talking about this all morning, including the fact that he said this is a massive and ongoing operation. And because of that, members of Congress and lawmakers are now waking up to this, in some cases wondering why Congress wasn't notified, wasn't looped if an act of war like this was going to take place, as the President himself using that language. But you also have members of the Gang of Eight. This is the top leadership, the top brass on Capitol Hill, those who are tasked with overseeing intelligence matters, with military matters, in leadership in Democratic and Republican sides of the aisle. I'm told that individual members of those groups were briefed by Secretary of State Marco Rubio. They were notified ahead of time that this operation would be taking place soon. I'm told they were not given a specific time in which it was going to take place. Of course, we saw what happened in these strikes happening between the U.S. and Israel and Iran. These lawmakers not notified exactly when that would be happening, but that is not stopping, Peter, some reaction that we're seeing, including from some top Democrats like Ro Khanna, for example. I mentioned him because he has a war powers resolution that he is pushing in the Republican-led House. It could be up for a vote as early as next week, Peter, and it is Congress reaffirming its right in this matter and trying to take away its constitutional authority from the executive branch. We've seen these kinds of efforts take place in the Senate as well. It's notable because we've seen Republicans join those efforts. But in this case, of course, with this operation in Iran, something that lawmakers have been waiting for potentially for weeks. They also received a briefing several days ago, Peter, from Secretary of State Rubio. He filled in lawmakers of the back and forth negotiations that we know were ongoing between the U.S. and Iran. We also know that there were recent meetings with the President's administration, with his top officials, as recently as yesterday with regional counterparts. I'm talking about Vice President Vance meeting with the foreign minister of Oman yesterday, having that discussion, still indicating that the U.S. was perhaps moving forward in a diplomatic solution with Iran's leadership. The President said yesterday, Peter, as well, when he was holding a political event in Texas, that he is unhappy with the direction of the talks. That was perhaps the most notable indication heading into last night where the President was thinking. He wasn't happy, he said, with the direction that the talks were going as it relates specifically to Iran's nuclear program, its ballistic missile program as well, and the support Iran's government gives to proxies in the region that we know have caused terror for many who live in the region. And so, again, we have this video from the President. We have some extraordinary statements from him, including that he warned of American casualties, as you talked to Kristen Welker about. That is notable coming from a president who campaigned on no new wars. In the last couple of weeks, I was talking to several MAGA allies as well as operatives who warned that this could potentially distance the president's base, as this was somebody who said that he would pull troops out of these countries and not potentially move them into this region. Of course, we know the president not intending to put boots on the ground in Iran, but these strikes, the potential of casualties, is something that we cannot understate or overstate, excuse me.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.